Wren. Also in attendance are Nancy James, Fran McLennan, Susan Carlson, Bill Stockert, Marcia Algier, and Andrea Sharvey, our liaison. Okay. I want to welcome our newest member, Susan Carlson, to our table. We are glad to have you here. And this is her first official meeting, and she's gotten a book and information about what's going on, but please feel free to ask any questions, because if you ask a question, it's probably somebody else in the room forgot it also, so please feel free to ask a question, and we'll do our best to answer it. So, all right, the first agenda item is the Affordable Housing Committee's charge discussion, and you may wonder why that is on, because last month we approved our updated charge that we have been working on for at least 2 years. It was a very exciting moment, and so I sent it to Mr. Kelly so that the Select Board could approve it, and Mr. Kelly told me we don't need a charge. However, that is not the end of the discussion. That's why we're having a discussion today. According to Mr. Kelly, when the trust was formed, we know the Affordable Housing Board was dissolved, but then our charge was rolled into the Affordable Housing Trust Board. Somehow, no one who's heard us working on this for 2 or 3 years has mentioned that to us. And, hello, Katie, welcome to. So they sent me some information. I'm going to share it with you, and then we have a discussion about what is a charge by another name, if we want to use, because what we did accomplish in the last couple of months, I want to use. So I want to find a way to use it. But let me just back up a little bit and explain to you what I learned. So the committee falls, according to Mr. Kelly, the committee falls under the Affordable Housing Trust bylaw. When it was dissolved, like I said, it was voted to have it absorbed into that bylaw, thus dissolving the need for your charge. In the first rendition, there were 2 columns, there were 2 paragraphs about us after they went through the warrant dissolved our committee and then reset it up again. And one was how the committee was established. This was 104-13. And it said, there shall be an Affordable Housing Committee consisting of 7 members who are residents of the town to be appointed by the Board of Selectmen for 3-year overlapping terms. Duties of the committee, added May 7th, 2018, said, the Affordable Housing Committee shall advise the Board of Trustees of the Town of Orleans Affordable Housing Trust Fund established pursuant to MGI 44 and the Board of Selectmen with respect to furthering the purposes of the Affordable Housing Trust to provide for the creation and preservation of affordable housing in Orleans for the benefit of low and moderate income households and for the funding of community housing. That was the original piece in that piece. Then I went further, and in May of 2019, it was revised, the charge was revised once again, and now we are the last line in section 12, and the only reference to us says, the board shall work with the town's Affordable Housing Committee in carrying out the purposes of the trust. That's all, that's what we have left in that. So after I learned all this information and came to grips with it, I decided that we should maybe have a discussion about the charge that we wrote. We may not call it a charge, but it's a lot more descriptive than how we are labeled in the trust board. So maybe it can be a mission, an objective, a goal, a vision. I don't know what it can be, but so it's back on the table again, even though we had a wonderful celebration last month about it. But I sent it out to you again, the final copy with the 3 corrections that we made last time. And ours starts, the Affordable Housing Committee is hereby charged with enabling the town, but we can change that piece of it. The second paragraph on the charge is pretty much what was in the first rollover. And then the rest of it is what we came up with to clarify our role. So that's what we have here. I would like to put this on our website and find some other name for it if it can't be a charge, and as some way of delineating what our role is in terms of the, hi, Rich, come on in. Rich Kendall is added to the group. I didn't give you a heads up on this because I really didn't want to write it all in a memo, so you're just probably hearing this for the first time, but I guess my first question is, why didn't anybody tell me we didn't need a charge? Because it's been on the forever. But secondly, do you believe that we should use what we have created as a charge in some way as an information piece for our committee and for the website? Fran?
We may not need a charge, but is there any reason we can't have a charge?
I don't think so. They didn't say throw it away, they just said we don't need it. But the charge would be from whom? The town or from?
That's the problem, Fran. The charge is usually voted on either by the town meeting or the select board. So I think it's Nancy's instinct. I was just looking at the charter, and the Affordable Housing Committee is not part of the charter, so it's not a town meeting. But I think if you could call it something else, and then we'll check it out with town council and John. But I agree, you should keep the word. I don't think you can call it a charge.
Right.
Is there any other committee or board or anything in town where there's an analogous relationship between two different committees? One is folded in under the other one, and is there any, model that we could look at that don't? Okay. Okay.
Yes.
I apologize for being late, but I'm just trying to gather. So we were established by a warrant article, and I'm trying to figure out how we went from being established in a warrant article to one line in the trust document.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that the trust document could have any bearing if we were established by a town meeting. So
They sent me something called the 360s. It's on our town website. It has to do with enacted legislation. And it says, the article also adopted 5/7/2018, the annual town meeting adopted the Affordable Housing Trust. Editor's note, this article also repealed former Chapter 104 Affordable Housing adopted by the 5/8/2000 annual town meeting as amended. Then it said, cooperation with Affordable Housing Committee, the board shall work with the town's Affordable Housing Committee in carrying out the purposes of this trust. And then I had read two other paragraphs. One was committee was established as of 2018 with 7 members, with the things that we put into our charge already. And then the second part was 104-14, duties of committee, which I just had read a moment ago. Were you here when I read that or not? I can't remember.
I walked in while you were reading.
So that was the first thing that came as a result of the 2018 town meeting, and then subsequently, 2019, the charge was revised, and we became the one-liner at the end. So we had 2 paragraphs, and now we have 1 line.
But who wrote that one? Who voted
Town
on
of
the one-liner?
Orleans. Charge
Because that to me
to,
says you work in conjunction with the Affordable Housing Committee, and I'm sorry, and I could probably be more helpful if I read it all, but.
I'm probably not giving you, what I'm using this for is a discussion so I can go back and see if I have the committee behind me in terms of what we want to do next with this. It's, like I said, I was sort of surprised by it all, and I've done some research on it, but what we can do since then, I think we need to be of one accord that you want me to go further with this, so that's why we're talking about it today. But this is the Town of Orleans charge the Affordable Housing Trust Board. It's,
Sure.
oh, Andrea,
I have an answer for you.
I love that.
It was taken as a huge, open-ended thing when we redid the bylaw at town meeting. You can request to the select board, this is straight from John right now, you can request that your charge be added because it fits under that huge language that's there, that open-ended language, and you can request the select board add the charge to more clearly define the work of the committee.
There you go.
I can do that?
Yeah, just make an official request, you'll get it on select board meeting for action, and you're done.
Will it be added to that, the housing charge? Is that what it's talking, the housing trust board charge?
This is the trust board charge.
Right.
They're just supposed to work with us. The Affordable Housing Committee, I think, should have its own charge.
Well, that's, you take the umbrella position. That's what we want.
What does that, I'm sorry, what does the take the umbrella position mean?
Meaning you're the bank for Congress, but you're the advocacy overview, move it along, represent our philosophy about it to the town.
Well,
So,
We request,
So
we have
it-
a charge, and it be added,
Yeah.
what's the bylaw you're referring to?
So, sorry, the town meeting, it was created during it's been changed, but Nancy's research was referring to the specific votes at town meeting.
Right,
And the charge was not necessary at town meeting. Nobody voted on a charge. We can, because it's at the discretion of town meeting, it's already been established, select board can add whatever you want added if it meets with our review, or, approval on review.
okay, well, I'll resubmit it, but it seemed that was what I wanted to do the first time, but it was sort of said that we couldn't do that. So I think we'll,
I think you have
Can I make a motion?
some people stepping in to make sure you're heard.
thank you.
yeah.
Looks like Fran's got a question.
Fran?
I like this, and I think we should submit it and roll it in or do whatever is legally appropriate. And one of the things that I really do like about this is that it refines our role as separate from the trust.
Right.
That we have an umbrella over not just capital A affordable, but housing needs in general for low and moderate income people. And that can include people who don't qualify for the capital A affordable housing, but still can't afford to get housing.
Exactly.
And so that is under our umbrella. So I have one, maybe off the range suggestion, and that is that we change the name of this from Affordable Housing Committee, if it's not charge, whatever, to Community Housing Committee.
That's probably going beyond our, I mean, we're an established committee of the town, right? But,
Can we just change our name?
You can ask for
No.
anything you want.
No.
It'll be debated. I mean, if it passes through you are the housing expert in town. If it passes through you and you can justify the reasons you're doing it, that's part of your advocacy.
I have to disagree. We were established by a vote at town meeting that we are the Affordable Housing Committee. I don't think we can change our name to Community Housing
You're
Committee.
not changing your name.
Well, that's,
that's what she wanted.
She was
I think she
suggesting
wanted
we
to
I
do
was
that.
suggesting,
Oh, you're changing your name. I thought you were changing in your charge what you looked at.
well, we are.
They're changing it.
But it does say, it expresses that idea in the charge now. You were just asking for the name to represent
Reflect the
that.
charge, or reflect what we've got here.
Well, Article 34 was establish affordable housing committee at the last town meeting, so I think we're probably not going to do that.
Okay, I
So-
told you I was off the range,
I
so.
appreciate your thought, but no, thank you. So if we can get our charge approved and be official, I think that will be a good step.
Nancy, would
Because-
you entertain a motion?
To what? To go to, yes, would you please?
I would make a motion that we request the Board of Selectmen approve the most recently adopted Affordable Housing Committee charge for the Affordable Housing Committee established by town meeting in 2018.
second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Yes.
Katie, can you repeat just?
Of course.
Thank you.
I made a motion that the Affordable Housing Committee requests the Board of Selectmen accept the charge as adopted at our last meeting, whatever the date of our last meeting was.
What was it? You do know that.
And I'm guessing the easiest way to get that on their agenda is to send an email to Molly and ask that
Yeah,
it be
and
put on.
copy John, so this is the action from the board.
Okay, well, I did start that the once already, but we will start it again, and hopefully this time it will go through, so.
Just want to say that as a brand-new person, this was one of the most helpful things that I read in
The
terms
charge?
of what this committee is all about.
Well, thank you, Susan, that's,
Really well-written, and
we've really been working on it for a while, and
For 2
finally, I think. I'm glad it made sense to you. That's very encouraging. Thank you. Oh, boy. I also
thanks for
wanted
all
to
that
introduce Richard Kendall is also on,
Hi.
that's Susan Carlson and Katie Wibby. I introduced everybody to Susan, to our new member. So this is our whole committee. We're all here today, which is wonderful.
A lot to swallow.
yes.
Take your time.
All right, thank you. Okay, most of the rest of our meeting is going to be looking with Marcia at our slide deck and trying to decide how we're going to go forward in setting the stage for understanding of affordable housing and informing other committees and people who are interested in what we are about. So I'm going to turn it over to Marcia right now, and I guess she's going to explain the overview of how she's created this. Then we're going to talk about what is in the slide decks, and then we're going to talk about what we might want to use it for imminently, what's coming up now, and how we go forward in the future.
Okay, thank you. So as, I guess we talked about it before, but let me make clear, this was meant to be basically a starting point, basically a tool in the toolbox that the committee, any member, any legitimate purpose for affordable housing can use any and all of the slides in the slide deck. It's very clear, though, whatever you do for a presentation, it depends on your purpose and your audience. So one might be purely educational, sort of a housing 101, just to educate people about what housing is about. Or it might be a specific advocacy for a project, in which case you would pick and choose some background slides, but then add other slides relating to the specific project. Or it may be a particular bent, like a finance committee or a CPC, in which case you would decide how much time you have, because that is one of the governing things. Pick and choose among the slides, modify them as needed, because some of them are maybe much more detailed than it needs to be. Others may need a little bit more elucidation on certain points, and then add slides that are of particular use. So I definitely want to hear your comments on whether the slide makes sense, whether it expresses what we're trying to express, but it doesn't have to be the be-all and end-all, because we will adopt each and every presentation. The other thing is, keep in mind, for PowerPoint specifically as a tool, there's a whole notes page. So what you do is you summarize the presentation. What I don't like is you have a PowerPoint presentation and somebody reads the slide. That is the most boring thing possible. So usually you try to make it as succinct as possible, and sometimes I made it a little bit more so that it was very understandable. But you have a whole notes page, and rather than reading the slide, you might point out a topic or a point, but then elucidate as much as you feel that audience needs. So for every presentation, you would have a slide, and then you would probably pick and choose among notes in terms of what you want to say to that particular audience for that particular purpose. So what I'm trying to do is create a slide deck that is as comprehensive and as probably wordier and more than you would need, but then it's much easier to delete and to pare down than it is to say, we didn't talk about a certain topic at all. So for example, for the Governor Prince Planning Committee, I didn't use a good part, say a third of the slides I didn't use, because I didn't go into the details of Massachusetts funding and housing vouchers and all of those. But for other people who want to know the full range of ways that we deal with housing, you may want to put some or all of that in. So we picked and choose what would be most relevant to a particular purpose. So with that, Bill's comments were very helpful, and I think we could add or detract, but I don't think we have to make it the perfect combination of information, because it depends what your need is. And I would urge that we do more rather than less, and that any comments you may have may go in the notes section rather than on the slide itself, to be useful for certain audiences. So I know actually there's a lot missing here, so we will keep adding to it as we go along. And the more presentations we make, one, you can modify the slides to be more useful, but two, you'll probably keep adding. So you may end up with 100 slides, and you get to pick and choose depending on how much time you have, who the audience is, how educated they are about the background of things, and what your particular purpose is on the presentation. So I would suggest we go quickly through it. This is not the end edit, so you don't have to edit every phrase or word. If you think a slide is generally too wordy, then that would be useful information. If you just want to make clear that we understand certain things, I could put it in the notes, and I'll make notes on my notes in order to add that. And then next time we use it, say, and one of the things that I would suggest we talk about is, what's the next purpose for a presentation? If we're going to finance committee, then we may want to do it slide different array of slides, and we may want to come up with some new ones. If we're going to CPC, that might be different. If you're advocating a particular project, that would be quite different too. So does that make sense in terms of what we're all about? So we don't have to make sure that it's the perfect slide, because there's no such thing today. Okay?
Okay.
So I
Any
was just going to
comments?
go through it, and hopefully it'll show up. Well, it'll show up there, that's right. And you all have it. If you don't have it, I guess you can turn around and look at it, and then I will take notes on your comments and make modifications as needed. Does that all make sense? Okay, great.
Okay. Yes or no?
Yeah, I'm fine. You want to back up a little more?
You want the two lights off?
Yeah, I guess so. Whatever.
I think it's just this switch. Yeah.
Okay, I think I just pressed, right? Yeah. All right, definitions, I think the definitions issue is, you can make it as long as you want, and, you know, Fran has worked on a very long glossary, and this was not meant to be that. As a matter of fact, we have reference to glossaries that we can do. So it was really just the issue that most groups who are not tremendously familiar with affordable housing, but have some interest in it, they're saying, well, what do you mean by affordable housing? So this is just meant to stimulate that, and then you can go into as much as possible. Now, Bill made the comment about you in the town use big A, capital A, whatever. I will say that I had never heard that term before, and I don't think it generally, I don't know if Massachusetts as a whole state uses it, but in Virginia, we didn't use that term. So I was using more the literature that among affordable housing advocates and professionals, and generally it's market rate versus committed or subsidized. That's generally the distinction, one being coming from the market, and the other one being deliberate intervention, usually by government, in order to commit particular units to that use. So that's why I use that, and I put in parens, small a, capital A, and you can use it as much as you want during the presentations, but I don't think we should assume everybody will know what you mean by small a, capital A. And I think market rate is a little bit more explanatory of what we mean by that. So Bill, I know you had some comments on it. Will this meet your need by basically adapting the notes to whatever you want?
Yeah, I think your point about having notes would help. And, you know, my comment, as you explained, was, you know, in my conversations with people, and even what I hear at meetings, you hear people talking about small a affordable or capital A affordable, and I can't really remember anybody referring to market rate affordable or committed or subsidized affordable. So, but I understand, and as you just explained, it's these slides are educational too. So, you know, using them both is fine, but my point was, as I said, you know, I've never really heard people talk about market rate affordable or committed, and without the explanation, I wouldn't really know what it was.
Okay. Any other points of the That's this slide?
For me, I like that distinction. I mean, it's new to me as well. A lot of this is new to me, but okay, that is a nice distinction.
And that is sort of core to this whole approach, because the problem is the market does not provide the housing we need for all the people we want to serve. So that's why we say, here's market rate. And I know where I come from in Arlington County, there was a lot of market rate housing built by the market, but the problem was the loss of market rate affordable and the need to increase committed or subsidized affordable. In our case here, it's the lack of it from day one. Okay? And again, this is not the be-all and end-all. You can edit to your heart's content for any particular presentation. All right, next is, this is trying to establish the connection with income. And people would get very confused as to, what do you mean by 80%, 60%, whatever? So there's a lot of numbers, but when you get into housing, you have to use that numbers because they're very much tied to funding sources and the financing of affordable housing. So we could do less or more. I tried to put in enough of the major categories that pertain in our case. But again, for a particular use, you may want to pare it down to just 2 or 3, or you may want to go further. And so it is basically getting people used to, when we say 80% and we use it as a shorthand, what that means. Does that make sense? And then I do say community housing. Now workforce, I know Bill had a comment on it, and I think many of you have been on calls in which the housing activists and professionals hate that term because there are 2 problems with it. One, it implies that if it's not workforce housing, people don't work, which is untrue. That in almost all subsidized housing, except for, the seniors and dementia and special needs, a lot of people work. They're not having enough income, but they work. And it tends to stigmatize people by saying, well, you don't work, you depend on the government for your housing. So I think there's that feeling that it stigmatizes people. The other thing that has to be careful is different states and different programs use the term workforce, sometimes loosely, but other times you have to meet very specific qualifications in order to get that funding. So the state does have workforce, which, as I understand, is not totally clearly defined, because I've heard it in relation to 100 to 120%, but I've also heard it in relation to 80 to 120%, and I've even heard 125. So it is not clear to me what the state of Massachusetts means by workforce. So I know Bill suggested we put it in definitions, but frankly, I don't know how to define it.
Okay.
I don't know, if somebody wants to try, we can do it. Basically, it's meant to try to evoke that you can be a hard-working parent in a household and still not afford housing. So it's
Right.
meant to be a positive term, but what it does is excludes people who are not in, quote, workforce housing, implying they don't work, which is not true.
Okay, so I want to make sure I understand this. So the difficulty with the word workforce, or the problem with it, is that it makes the other categories look like those people are not working. Okay.
Because in most cases, for family housing, almost all families have somebody working and earning some income somewhere.
Right.
And so, the stigma of, well, you're just a welfare mom just sponging off the government comes to mind, and people really want to get rid of that. A lot of people are working hard, they just don't earn enough money to afford housing.
Is there another term that is coming into use?
You know,
I don't
and
know.
part of it is what I've seen in both government as well as the community development field is a term comes into use, gets stigmatized, they throw it out, try another one. I mean, that happens with the disability community, right? So it's a constant dynamic thing about what you call it. I think the important thing for us, and then for us going forward, is to understand what funding sources call it, so that you can then qualify for the funding, because that's key.
Marcia, I
Yeah.
just had a question about the 80% to 100% community housing. Does this suggest that CPA funding can only be used?
Up to 100.
but it has to be within that 80 to 100%?
It can be below
It
80.
can be below.
I believe
Okay.
it can. Somebody help me with that, because I don't know
Yes, they
CPA as
can
well.
be,
The
but
answer
they
is
can
yes.
also go a little
Right.
higher than
I
the
think it's a
80.
maximum of 100, but it can be below that. Yeah, that's a good point.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Marcia, the trust fund funds can only be used for 80% unless they're the CPA funds, then they can go up to 100.
They can be below 80.
Yes.
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 I think the point is that it's a maximum, not a set range with a minimum. So maybe that's a little misleading, that's a good point, because it's not 80% community housing. Community housing is up to 100, right? Yeah, good point.
Too, yeah.
I'm good with that point. Any other questions or comments on this? I mean, part of it is also to so that we all clearly understand what we're saying and what we mean by what we're saying. Brad?
100 to 120, sometimes used for family or workforce housing. Subsidies are limited. Are there any for that level above 100% AMI?
There is a state workforce housing program that I believe allows up to 120. I think Penrose is
Penrose is
applying
doing
for
that, yes.
That's
So there is.
The extra.
Yeah,
But I've
thank you.
seen other definitions in the state, and I'm not familiar enough with the state, the history of state funding. I've seen 125 in a few cases, and I have a feeling there might be some other definitions that have been used in the past. But it's clearly not a firm word definition.
But Fran, I've heard, and it's my understanding that in Orleans, the AMI is high, so we can't go up to 120. I think it only goes to 110. I think it's a flexible number depending on the income range.
Oh,
I
interesting.
think, yeah, and I think it depends on programs. I think there are different voucher rules, depending on whether you do voucher versus production programs.
'Cause I think that conversation came up with Penrose and how high they could go on their income.
Okay? And then, people then do say, well, what do you mean by it? So this is a lot of numbers, but it is numbers, and I think people start to understand really how high some of this is relative to need and how low it is relative to the number of people who qualify. So I generally, when I do presentations, I ask them to focus on a family of 4 at 80%. You know, a family with 1 parent and 3 children, or 2 parents and 2 children, and they can earn $77,750 and still qualify for affordable housing. So it gives people an idea that you don't have to be poverty level to qualify, and there's a lot of people who would qualify because it's very easy not to earn median income, depending on what your industry is. And part of what I've been trying to get better data on, and it's not really clear, in Barnstable County, what is your typical wage for a typical type of job? And so I have some of that information, but your typical waitress working 20, 80 hours a year earns pretty low. So part of what I'm looking for is prevalent wage. So that still is something that you can adapt for your audience depending on who it is. Okay? Yes.
Can I just add one thing, because that's really important, what you're talking about, and specifically waitress, hairdressers, medical assistants, I mean, whoever they are in town. But sometimes in those seasonal jobs, they're on support during the winter.
Right.
Which puts a dent, so, you know,
Right.
it's.
Yeah, this is
Take those-
assuming a
Right.
2,080-hour, full-time, 40-hour-a-week job.
Which is.
Which
not
doesn't happen in
necessarily
a
present
seasonal
in our
economy.
community.
Yeah, so you can play that in a number of ways, and when you're talking about the needs in terms of seasonal workers, then it depends what they're doing off-season,
Right.
which varies tremendously, obviously. Okay? And then clearly, this goes up every year. HUD revises their limits every year, so we always have to, these numbers will change, and people will say, well, that wasn't what I saw before, well, then maybe they updated it. And it's for Barnstable County, that is the area that pertains in this case. Okay? All right, so this really, this is more background, and we really don't have to spend much time on it, but people will ask sometimes, well, doesn't the federal government do this kind of thing? So this goes a little bit through. We do have public housing here, And so at various times, people will say, well, what about the blanking? And I must admit, I don't know all the names for all the projects, but there are public housing units here in Orleans. And so on the subsidized housing inventory, they are some of those. So that is, and for those who don't know the history, that used to be the primary way to produce affordable housing. It has long since not been that. And as a matter of fact, I think it's pretty clear that all the public housing authorities have been severely defunded and are not producing much new housing and can't even keep up with maintenance for the existing housing. I think it's a scandal how horribly they've been funded. Yeah.
Marcia, we should check, but I believe the Housing Authority homes in Orleans are all state-funded, not federal.
State funded. You mean there's separate public housing funding from the state? Because usually it's the
Is it
federal
federal
money that
through the
goes through
state?
the state.
Yeah,
I can check on that, but
Yeah.
if it's a public housing authority, it has statutory, what's the word, authority
Yeah.
under the National Housing Act.
Yeah.
But I can check.
okay.
I mean, they may get some additional state money, but they are considered public housing for the purpose of federal regulations and federal funding. And there's the Orleans one, oh, there it is, 128 units. And then this is also, because you also have to look at the wait list. The wait lists are always huge, humongous, with wait times that are very. Okay, and then this is we do use it because we do use low-income housing tax credit, which is now basically the major way the federal government helps affordable housing, which I think is kind of interesting, that basically, you know, back in the 80s, they basically said the federal government is not going to produce new housing, basically, and what we're going to do is get the private investors to pay for affordable housing. So this was the way to do it. And it is the important way to get major income into housing projects. But it is also a very complicated way to do it, which is why then you get to 107 Main. It doesn't justify this. One, there's some minimum sizes, but I think even if you meet the minimum size, it's so much work and so much effort that it takes to attract private investors that it ain't worth it unless you have 40, 50 units. Okay? And then Massachusetts, all states do their own thing with LIHTC within federal requirements. So every state does regulate within the bonding authority given under IRS how much they put out, at what intervals, and with what requirements. So Massachusetts regulation of LIHTC is also very important. So stop me if you have any questions. This is not meant to be the education on this, so if you have any questions on it, let me know. And you see the current MA requirements and lots of numbers in it, but it's important to know what Massachusetts requires when you get to LIHTC funded projects. They do require certain things, like the very low income has to be included. Okay, and then what we also have to understand is the major ongoing source of subsidy is what used to be called Section 8 is now called Housing Choice Vouchers. And that's another example of programs that have a huge wait list and wait time. Sorry, I went back. I don't know how to go back. Anybody have questions on vouchers? Okay, and then these are other programs that have relevance to our area. And I think home funds have been used here in CDBG. The non-entitlement funding has been used here. I'm not sure about Federal Home Loan Bank Board. Does anybody know whether we've used it here?
I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah. They do make some funding, usually for major projects, but they do make some funding available. Okay, and then this is the special stuff that goes on in Massachusetts. Starting with the 40B and the purpose and the uses of 40B. And this has been a real education for me because Virginia does not have a 40B. I also think, and I was going to double check, it's been in existence since '69, but relatively few communities have met the threshold, so would be exempt from 40B for all that time that it's been in effect, which says something about it. Okay, any questions on the 40B? And again, you can go into as much or as little detail as you want, because it is a very detailed process. And then this gets to the 10%, and I know we've had this discussion before. A lot of people think, once you reach 10%, you've made it, you don't have to worry about it. So I made the point of saying it's really the threshold, is the sort of the floor that you're trying to aim for, not to imply that 10% of your housing stock is affordable, you've solved your affordable housing problem, which is not the case at all.
That's probably one of the hardest things for us to reteach, because people have believed the reverse of that for quite a long time. So
Yeah,
we
but
really need
part
to
of what,
emphasize it.
yeah, part of what every locality has to do is what percentage needs to be affordable in our town to make it a diverse housing stock supporting a diverse population. So there's no magic number to it. I think it always is above 10%, but what it is, each locality determines for itself.
Marcia, just a question. So, if a community has surpassed the 10%, are they still able to utilize the 40B applications?
They can as a federal, what's the word, friendly 40B. So they can use that, and I believe you then have to get the state through the local LIP program to approve that. But you can go with a friendly 40B, even once you exceed 10%. Okay? And the subsidized housing inventory, that's where you determine the 10%, and there are very specific rules as to what is included and not included. And in our case, in Orleans, the denominator, which is the total number of year-round housing units, varies, goes up and down, usually down. And so it's not just the production of new affordable housing, it is over what denominator of total housing stock, because it does not count seasonal housing, which is considered basically vacant housing. And so it's really occupied housing. And with Penrose, Orleans almost surely will exceed 10%, even if the denominator changes a bit. The other thing that I'm still learning about is when something is counted. So if something is approved for some period of time to get counted, but if it isn't built, then it can drop off, and you can change, your SHI can change depending on the timing of the actual occupancy of the unit. And then these other kinds of programs that I'm still learning about, but have been used and are used in Massachusetts. I will point out that Community One Stop, that is actually the funding source that we applied for and got the planning grant for the Governor Prince plan. We applied through the Community One Stop for Growth and got the $74,000 grant. And it does fund development of housing up to a certain point. So it would be, Governor Prince, for example, would be eligible for infrastructure and for capital improvements under that program. I don't know what, I think it'd be very competitive, but it is eligible for that. And there's a local initiative program on Friendly 40B. You can see it there. Okay, then we get into, so that's sort of the background, and I'm sure we can come up with more slides for it. In most cases, you would really use only a couple of these, depending on what, again, who your audience is and what your purpose is. But it does give you the basis for getting into any of these should there be questions about, well, what about public housing? Well, what about the voucher program, et cetera? Okay? Okay, so next is the housing needs study in 2017. So it gets a little bit into the contents of it. And I think it's an excellent study. I think it's full of good information. I love those appendices. I think the appendices are great. Everything from the glossary to regulations, et cetera. I found it very informative. Susan, you might too, to actually spend some time and read those. Okay, I did go into a little bit more detail, and you don't have to do it, so that when people say, well, how do you determine what is a housing need? And there are some techniques or some modalities to do that. So I picked a couple. One is to look at the housing stock and basically determine your gap. So you look at your housing stock, see what is affordable at what income and what your gap is, were you to have sufficient housing that's commensurate with your income. So that was one analysis that the housing needs study went through. And then those are the numbers that Karen came up with as part of the study. So I would say there are two important tables from my reading of it in that study. This is one of them, the gap analysis for the housing stock in Orleans. And she made it so that it added up to the same number. It doesn't always have to add up to the same number, but she made it, I think, so that it's more understandable. But basically, from a point of view of looking at the housing stock and deciding what the gap in the stock is, she came up with that 274 on the rental side. There's a rental side and there's a homeowner side, and I focused on the rental side.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
Considering that this was done and many of us lived this in 2017, would you say now that those numbers have changed?
Well, you know, everybody says they're out of date. Well, one, a lot of census data, and you only get census data every 10 years, so it's valid for the latest census data. We're now getting the new census, but we don't have all the results. So there's some key data that you only get from the census, and she relied on. There's some updates with the American Community Survey every year, but it's not quite as detailed. What I did later on in the presentation is I showed that on national and regional level, all the trends are worsening. So the presumption is it's also worsening in Orleans. I don't have the numbers to prove that, but that's what I was trying to say, is that regionally it's getting worse and nationally it's getting horrible. So why are we to believe it's anything but worse in Orleans? Okay, so the second one is actually looking at cost burden, which you look at your households by income. You're looking for the low and moderate income households who are spending 30% or more of their income toward housing. And different ways to compute that, but it does include, for renters, utilities, because sometimes it's, utilities are including rent, sometimes it's not. For homeowners, it includes mortgage payments and a few other things. So there is a way to compute what housing costs mean, and then how to compute whether a household is cost burden. And to be clear, in the study, it shows a lot of people who are above 80% that are cost burden. Even people who are above median who are cost burden, who are paying more than 30%. On the other end, it shows a lot of people who are paying more than 50% of their income for rent. So that's the severely cost burden. So you can pick and choose which numbers are the most important for your audience, and then proceed to that table, which is, this is the second table. This is, again, on the renter side with a lot of numbers. And when I use these numbers, I said, just to show you this, but then I go immediately to the summary of the numbers. And even that is a lot of numbers, so you could even summarize that. I think it's useful to show that the severe cost burdens is a pretty significant number. So at the 30%, the very poor households, there are 100 renters who are spending more than 50% of their income for rent. That is extreme need. So depending on your audience, it's useful to pick and choose those numbers so that you can be most effective in how you advocate. And if you look at the bottom, we're talking about 913 households in Orleans with cost burdens. That's a lot of households. And when we talk about producing 100 units in 10 years, that's only 100 out of 900. You're a long way from meeting the documented cost burdens. And so this is trying to summarize it. It's a little wordy, and I certainly can cut back on the words, but since this was a summary slide, I tried to let it stand by itself so people could read it and understand what it means. So the key numbers are the 274, and then an additional 529 owner households, and I think renters are an obvious priority for needs, but at some point, I'd love to look at the details about the 529 owner households and figure out what is the nature of the need. Is it a rehab of the structure? Is it you're still paying mortgage? Is it because they're just very poor? It depends on what the nature of the need is in owner households in order to come up with strategies that meet their needs. And also showing the 110, so even above 80%, up to a median, you still have 110 more households that are cost burdened, from 80 to 100%. And then on the right side, I think we've talked about this before, but it doesn't include a lot of need issues that would, I think, increase the numbers should you have those. So, for example, it doesn't include people who work in Orleans but don't live here and have to commute in for their jobs. And to the extent we want to attract workforce for our businesses, they can't afford to live in Orleans. And so these numbers do not include them, because it basically is based on census, which is based on residency. And it doesn't include a lot of other people too. And it doesn't include growth, which in future slides I talk about how needs have grown overall, national level and regional level. So I would assume Orleans' needs have grown unless we've pushed out all the poor people and there's nobody left.
So, Marcia, at some point when this was done in 2017 or whatever, was there a family or a person that is represented in those 274 specific families or people? Is that how those numbers, I mean, they looked at actual people, what they were earning, what their rent was, or what their mortgage was, or whatever? So there would have been a list.
Based on census counts of individual households.
Okay.
Yeah, so those are real people, real numbers. Now, there is, obviously with census, there's some extrapolation, et cetera, but it's based on the sample that census does. And census is still the most comprehensive data that we have, and we only get it every 10 years.
Marcia, the reference to income spent on housing is just rent or mortgage, it's not utilities or
No,
other.
for rent, it does include utilities, because sometimes rent includes utilities, and the landlord pays the utilities. If not, they have various ways to estimate what a typical utility cost would be for a one-bedroom unit, blah, 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 and they add it on. So it's rent plus, including rent plus utilities. Okay? All right, and then it goes into the strategies, which I think did a very good job in terms of the strategies, and at some point, for some audiences, you might want to go into these. Overall, I didn't go into it very much when it's just sort of a background presentation, but obviously the study and the committee talked about a variety of ways, not just money, to aid affordable housing. So there's 3 categories of those strategies, and there's a whole list of them, obviously. So I just did a few in terms of the housing preservation assistance strategies. And then I went immediately into progress, because I think actually the town has made great progress vis-a-vis the strategies. It's done a great job moving forward with the trust fund, with the housing coordinator, with the various kinds of project-specific stuff being done. So it's good to show that great progress has been made on those strategies. And then this is sort of ongoing, you never sort of meet your end goal here, you have to keep doing the education and more investing of money and the land use zoning, the whole issue of dormitory type, which I think is an interest, continues to be an interest, and various other programs. Okay, so then we get into the 10-year plan. Do you want to keep going, or should I stop, or what?
We'll go through this quickly.
I'm sorry?
We'll go through this one quickly, maybe.
Yeah.
I think
okay.
we're going.
So here's the 10-year plan, the 100 units. And I think the major point here is from, I think what going forward is this is the first year 10-year plan. This does not achieve all goals. So this is 10-year plan number 1, but we have to make progress, and I think we're making great progress so that we will meet the 100 units, hopefully with Prince and then with 107 and with having Penrose done. And then because people are saying, well, isn't this data out of date? It may be somewhat out of date. Data is always out of date because you always get it a couple years later. But if anything, things are growing worse. So I did find a couple of sources for additional information on needs. There was a regional market analysis done about the same time and talked about the various needs in different ways. Penrose did the market study and just issued it in October, and they did a little bit more research that's up to date using some 2019 figures, as well as looking at the projections that were done in the regional market analysis. More about that. And again, you can pick and choose which numbers are useful for a particular audience. And they came up with those numbers in terms of cost burden renters. And I think, Bill, you had a question about redefining it. So we could add a little bit more, or you could just explain it orally what we mean by cost burden in that case. We could try to fit a more footnote in there so that the definition is clear. And then I just went through a couple of other reports that are showing other ways to look at housing needs, and the fact of the matter is things are getting worse, not better. The whole issue of housing wage, what it takes to earn in order to afford housing, the whole issue of housing wage.
That slide, there's some of us in business, with one foot in the business community that are hiring people in town. You know, $18 in Stop and Shop translates rapidly to this line. And then against housing prices and inventory, available units to rent or purchase.
Yeah, in Barnstable County, you need a wage of $32.06 to afford a typical two-bedroom rental. And this is a Harvard Center. They do something every year, so I picked and choose some of those. I think that's it. Yeah.
Thank you, Marcia. Well, you can see there's quite a lot of, it's packed with what we can use, and we thank you for that. Is there anything that comes to your mind that's missing that you feel that should be in there as well? Because I know there's tons of things in there, but is there anything that you see, having looked at your own copy and going over it today, that we missed out on? Fran?
This is terrific, Marcia. I just think it's wonderful. And I love the way that you put it together so we can pick and choose and mold any kind of presentation. It seems to me if we're going to do education, there's four topics. One is what is affordable housing, which you cover. And then what are the housing needs? and that's in our study and is covered. Thirdly, I think we need more conversation about what kind of housing do we want in Orleans? Do we want small projects, big projects? Where do we want them located? Downtown? Spread more throughout the community? Those conversations we have had generally, but I don't think that we've anchored a real policy about that. So the first thing is definitions, the second thing is data, the third thing is policy, and then it seems to me the fourth thing is financing. And what are the ways that we can find money for whatever the specific projects are. And I think that that third thing is not really included here, but it comes up in the conversations about, well, the subsidy for Penrose project is da-da, and the subsidy for 107 Main Street is something much higher, and that's not okay. So I think that we do have to have that conversation. And if we're talking about Governor Prince, are we talking, I mean, I think we need input into, are we talking about putting a large development project of housing at Governor Prince? Or are we talking about small cottages at Governor Prince? Or are we talking about a combination of commercial or a town need at Governor Prince? I mean, there's all kinds of variables. And that obviously is the business of the Governor Prince Planning Group. But if we as a committee agree on a policy of we want to have most of our, for example, we want to have most of our affordable housing in the downtown because that's where the sewering is. But that doesn't preclude that we also want to have some habitat housing out in South Orleans or whatever. But I mean, I'm not only saying that from my own point of view, but I think we need to anchor that down a little more solidly, because I do think that's part of the conversation that needs to happen.
Anybody else?
I feel like I just took a course. I'm not sure I'm passing,
Do you have a
but
headache?
one of the things that jumped out at me with this charge statement when I was looking at the slides was the part about including the importance of stories of the real effects of lack of housing on local businesses in the community. And it just made me think, for someone who's just beginning to understand all this, kind of understand people and their stories, which is different from data, you know, and I just thought, wonder what that could look like,
As part of this presentation.
possibly, or any kind of educational outreach, I guess. I thought that really jumped out at me in the charge.
Yeah, and I think that this committee has had a lot of conversation about communication. How do you communicate? And the stories enter that. The importance of making it positive and then making it human.
It was really good.
Okay, anybody else?
No, I
Okay,
just
so-
I want to correct myself. When we were talking about the 100 to 120% of the workforce housing before, I just went back through my memory, and the 110 was actually early planning for 107. So that goes back to Ted Malone, so that comment was probably out of date. So I just wanted to correct myself.
I'm glad you went back through your memory and found it.
Good for you. I found it, though.
Andrea.
Certainly.
On the page, Marcia, there was a page where you had kind of what are the tools? It would be really good because the planning board and the select board are already engaged in talking about changing things that would affect your advocacy position. So like in the tools, when you've listed zoning, and you talked about ADUs or, different kind of zoning relief, it would be very good for somebody from the planning board to talk you through those tools and where they're working, where they're not, and what are the ongoing conversations right now before, for instance, you might present this to the planning board. So you walk in aware of some of what either their success or their frustration, he was recognizing your goals too, because they're very specific, and having lived through them, it would just mesh the conversation so beautifully.
Can you give an example of what?
Yeah, so we did ADU, accessory dwelling by right, in town. Very few have been built because it still comes down to the square foot cost of doing the building. So we've got a financial gap that if there were, so that goes back to then your advocacy or your demand or your resource creation to fill a specific gap if you understand why that zoning tool isn't working in this town. The other one that's up for grabs right now, we're just at the beginning of the discussion, is the challenge of the single-family home residential zone is being questioned because of commercial activity in the zone. And the Commission several years ago had recommended that we establish a different kind of zone, a second zone of housing that the the planning board rejected because they thought it was too controversial to bring to the select board at the time. It was in the reset study. But times have changed and the pressure on the community has changed. So, that single family zone is something that is a tool of redlining and may be up for grabs. So because we're looking at the role of investment properties it's already going on, non-owner occupied properties, and the whole idea of hoteling or boarding houses or rental units in 90% of our land use in town. That's a big one.
Yeah.
You guys, as the housing experts, should be able hopefully to tell the other boards what you're after and how it could work eventually.
I mean, it
So I
sounds
guess-
like there's some need for some joint communication.
That's what I'm
So
thinking.
if planning and affordable housing got together and say, these are our problem, what are the best and realistic ways to do it? The whole issue of exclusionary zoning, of course, is nationwide issues, and some states have actually did basic change to single-family. Basically, they've outlawed single-family zoning,
Right.
which I actually think is a great idea, but it's a little revolutionary for a lot of people.
Okay, so I guess now we have information, now we have goals, and I guess the next piece is, what do we want to do with it, and when do we want to do with it? And the question is, we're saying we want to go to these committees and educate them. They need to want to be educated, first of all, and I think, going back to what Marcia said, I think the presentation is interesting in terms of a discussion starter, but I think the next piece has to be the discussion, because if we just present this information, we've already found out that many people say they agree with affordable housing in theory until it becomes a financial decision or a what neighborhood decision. So we do know that is our constant issue. So the point of going to these committees and talking about it is we have to find out what their concerns are, and then we need to address it, because I feel like presenting what we have here is, yes, thank you very much, but this is our problem. So I think we almost have to turn it around and say, what do you think the problem is, and how can we address this in conjunction with maybe the planning or the CPC or the finance or any group that seems to be concerned about it. So it's almost like we have to get some information from them, rather than just do a dog and pony show that says, we are affordable housing and we have the answers and we'd like to tell you about it, because I think I don't think that's where we need to be right now. I think we've got a lot of camps right now in terms of what funding needs to be used in this town and what it needs to be used on. And obviously, we think affordable housing is a great idea, but how we fit it in with other people, with other committees is really important. So I'm sort of thinking the next step is to connect with some of these committees and say, we'd like to have a discussion with you. We'd like to come and see, what do you think you would like to do with that? Because, I think that I think that's what we need to do, so that we're not just creating another activity to show that we exist and we want this to happen. And I think also Fran's point about the 3rd and the 4th, that's where the discussion at the Stop and Shop and in my post office and every place else I go are those two last things. You know, well, big or small, and who's going to pay for it and how much is it going to cost? So I know we're not the financial people, but we have to answer that question on some level as well. So, having said all that, plus I also was, when I was looking through Marcia's things, I was thinking, we need to put some of this on our website today. Some of what's in this packet is really good. And even though we've shown it someplace, I went back to our website and looked at what everything is there. And like, the way it's set up, it says housing studies, but Marcia's really good thing on what she did with Penrose is tucked into that, but you wouldn't, unless you were looking for it, you probably wouldn't find it.
Right.
So I think we need another label that says what you'd like to know about affordable housing in Orleans, or something like that, and put some of these really good slides on it. Not all of them, of course, but some key ones that really seem to stick out, like the process and, you know, some of the needs. So,
I mean, we can certainly post it. I think what it is, and I did have an email with, who's in charge of the website?
Sarah?
Yeah, and basically, it's being redone, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so she sort of didn't want to talk about doing much until it gets redone.
But one of the points of view, because actually the question came up earlier today in a meeting, is the website is being redone from the point of view of a user. So not necessarily how town government, like laying over the foundations of a building and you have to open each door to find out what you want to use, but there is a desire for a kind of a user-based page about housing that doesn't, maybe that is a 101, that if you want to learn more, here's the trust, if you want to learn more, here's the housing committee, but creating a central kind of landing page that maybe has parts of both of your efforts, one place for anybody.
No, that may be because I'm not really good at web pages or websites. That may be where you can use some of your CPC money and hire a consultant that knows a little bit about websites. Frankly, I think social media as well, but let's start with websites and what is a good way to just set up a web page. Now, it obviously has to fit into the towns, or actually you could set up a separate one. I don't know what the rules are.
Set up, I think the plea was for set up a landing page that's an overview of kind of what you want residents or non-residents to know, separate from here's government, you know, the two departments.
Right.
But more of a,
I mean, but and I don't know what the rules are, and I'll just say it, could you set up a affordablehousing.com?
Yeah, I guess I don't know. Let's stick
yeah,
with,
we can buy, we've got one for the cultural council. You can buy whatever, any landing page you want. We can build as many pages as we want with the new system. So if you decide that you're setting up an advocacy piece or a goals piece or something, you can set that up separate from how you are organized to do your work.
Right.
That's what we're talking about, two different.
okay.
One is a campaign or an education page, and the other is a structural page about your research, your studies, who's there, that kind of thing.
All right, well, we're poised at this point then to be ready for the new website then, in terms of information and what we want to do, and we can decide that as this comes along, and I do think we need to make it clearer. Speaking about, sorry.
I just want to support what you were saying about how we approach groups or other committees or other boards. And I agree with you that if we just show up and do a presentation, it's like, thank you very much, and that's it. I think that we need that dialogue as to what do they need, what are their concerns with the plans for affordable housing, where do they think we could fit in and help them? Because as we've been learning, you know, you'll hear, and we've said it before, you know, everybody says, we're all in favor of affordable housing. We have been in favor of affordable housing, and then the but.
Yep.
And I think how do we meet with these groups and others, whether they be town committees or boards or other community organizations, to get their input as to, you know, I think you can do some of these excellent slides as a basis for the discussion. But I think the goal is to create the atmosphere for the discussion that you talked about and have that discussion rather than just go in and, could we have some time to make a presentation? So I'm not sure how to accomplish that, but I support what you were saying because I think that's the way to go with it.
Nancy?
Trying to think how to bring this question. So if we were to go to the planning board or some of these other committees that you were talking about, Andrea, and we did here's some information, do you think and we said, what do you need from us? Would they know, would they be able to say, here's what the planning board wants from the affordable housing, what we need to know about affordable housing? Do they know?
I think, and what scares me is the planning board's earlier decision that came out this spring that said, if you only build housing in Governor Prince, we will not support it. So, again, I think that we're in a little bit of a bind, and the select board is, I think, maybe called to step in. But we're struggling, I think, with getting everybody on the same page in town, acknowledging that there's a housing crisis, acknowledging that we can do something about it, and just speaking the same language, because the prejudice that you've discovered, that you've talked about very much in this room is alive and well in many boards and committees. And whether it should come as a request for training for every board and committee member in town, that they go through some kind of training that's either originates with your board or we use an outside person. No one in town is on the same page about this discussion. So I don't think you can be experts until people speak your language and recognize there's a problem. And I'm going to talk to Nancy later in the week about this, but some of us would like to require, many of us went through a whole, multiple months of training in order to just learn the basic language. I think there's an education that should be required on some particular boards to meet this crisis, as membership on the board and orientation.
So second part of that question then, so let's say that we could do that education part. Then the third point that you mentioned, the whole policy piece, how much where? Maybe more specifically, how would we do this?
I think policy and financing are really what you guys, because you then, if you get that advocacy down and refined, you then become the part of the CPC that helps us get to new tools, or part of a town meeting warrant or something, because you've set the table for residents to think about positive ways to impact the crisis. But right now, there's so much prejudice, you've seen it on multiple committee responses to requests, all kinds of requests, that none of us are speaking the same language. So maybe it's up to the select board to invite this training of getting everybody on the same page. And you guys take over, I agree with Fran, you guys take over, 2, 3, and 4 of what Fran was talking about.
I will say on planning, because planning is a different way of approaching it, that actually some of the most ingrown institutional barriers come from planning and regulation. But there's a whole field out there, and various people have tried different things. Exclusionary zoning is just one of them. And so to the extent you can have a conversation with the planning board on planning tools that have worked or not worked, or why you need it to get at some basic, it's the structural stuff that really has caused this. But that does require a fairly extensive and in-depth, not just training, discussion, because none of us know all of that. So I think that would be to the extent that the planning board would be interested in talking about the institutional structural barriers to affordable housing, and we can do research on our part about what's going on in different places, and how about we come up with ways to use zoning, to use subdivision, to use the regulatory mechanisms either to encourage it or at least to get rid of the structural barriers.
So Marcia, with all due respect, I would make it even more focused. The planning board believes, as past chair, that we are helping in our request to town meeting, that we are impacting the problem in the right direction. We make these stabs, but they don't work. And so I think the question is more intimate. It is, if you accept that there's a crisis and you think that you're, like, we changed setback requirements, the downtown, 0 lot lines. We allow the ADUs, by right. We've made these steps, but we have no takers. And so, first of all, does the current select board agree that there's a problem? Are the tools that they've set forward really working? And how can we partner in that? I wouldn't make it national, because if you just say, hold the planning board accountable for its actions, and then ask them, can we approve? Then that, okay, Helen, because there was another push within the planning board for something called form-based design, which also makes the use and reuse of buildings for housing and all other activities easier. But we're so married to an antiquated use table that we couldn't allow for form-based design. But yet, form-based design is the basis of what Union Studios work was doing. So there is a lot of conversation to happen that would open thinking, but I don't think the planning board would agree that there's a problem.
Okay,
I may make a lot of planning board members.
I was just going to say, well, I did not
They
open this
can't
up
hear you
as
because you're
a,
not speaking into the microphone.
we love the planning
In
board.
terms of what Andrea has been saying, that there are a lot of committees in town who are not directly involved in the crisis of affordable housing, but that they are relating to that crisis of affordable housing. And I think I hear you, Andrea, saying that perhaps the select board, as the executive functioning body in the town, should require some education about affordable housing for entrance into a committee. And we are the ones to be doing that education. So in a way, I think I hear you suggesting something different from what I had agreed with you about a moment ago, Nancy. But maybe it comes from higher ups, that we don't go and say, we need to educate you about affordable housing, but it comes from a select board's recognizing the level of crisis, the importance of addressing the crisis on all different levels, including many, many committees, that you require
I'm speaking
this.
completely out of turn, because there's no official action by the select board at this point. But I think that if we make the case that housing is in a crisis position, the select board is the appointing body. And we're rethinking how we mentor and feed and train and retain volunteers that do a lot of the work on lots of committees that professionals would otherwise be doing in the town. And so just requiring to get us all on the same page, especially now since there's no big project, we're in a study phase, it would be a great time to do 1 hour training for all of us that's specific to the Cape and Massachusetts, and then turn it over to the Affordable Housing Committee to do the intimate work of talking, and that also buys some time to get these conversations together. But yes, that's what we're proposing. I'm happy. I didn't know whether it should come from your board as the kind of housing experts in town, but there is a case to be made that it comes from the select board as the appointing body for membership in these committees.
And the reason it should come from the select board, after listening to this, and I like to think about things longer before I make a final decision, but the top of my head right now says to me, there are a lot of conflicting desires in this town. A lot of people want different things. Yes, housing is a crisis. Yes, we really believe strongly that we need to fix this, but we're not the only cause in the town. And the fact to say that we can go and educate everyone about our consideration without, from our committee point of view, I think is a little bit, bold, another word, it's a little bold. I think it should come from the top down if the select board really want to, support that. And then we can support them in our information, but I don't feel good about telling every committee in this town that they should listen up to affordable housing. I would prefer to have a discussion and see if we can help, but I think we need to, there's just a lot of other conflicting issues that are going on right now. This town is full of them. I mean, if we really want to have a whole big table with all of these things on a table and have everybody come and talk about them all together, because wants and needs and what needs to be done in this town it's a little bit over the top right now.
Yeah, Nancy, just to be clear, we're not saying that, we're saying that housing is at a crisis point for people who want to live here. It affects the future of the town, the stability of the town. Clean water, climate change, there are many crises. But I think every board member, in order to do the work of public trust that they have to do as they vote and think about whatever their committee is, needs to be aware of all of the various, because we have to take care of our environment and our people and our financial future, right? All of those things. We're not going to rob Peter to pay Paul. It's,
Right.
so I just want to reframe that you wouldn't be, I think one of the things is education also points towards solution. You're not really, in your education process, you're not asking for dollars. You're just making people aware of the language and the tools.
Sure. And I can agree with that. It's just the process, how we go about bringing ourselves to other committees that we need to think about. We do have one invitation already to the Finance Committee. It's already on the books for January, and this might be a good little test case to see my idea of seeing what they might want from us, and then us deciding what we'd like to present to them as, as a way of using some of our data. I think that would be a good test case in terms of what we're doing next.
Is that an invitation for all of us, or a few
No, it
people?
was supposed to be just for me and Bill.
That's why it's been done in the past.
Right, so I certainly will have everybody else's input appreciated.
But you said that's in January?
Yes, I think that's not, I realize this is December, and so we might have to do this on the fly, but I think the things, our discussion today has really helped. I think I'll try to put kind of a summary of what we decided and where we're going next after this meeting and send it out to you, because I think, we're just, one thing I like about our committee is we don't just present things, we actually discuss them and come back and talk about them some more, and I think it's valuable as we think about them more, so let's,
Well, I wonder too, I like Fran's point about number 3, the policy. And that hasn't been articulated, because policy is important when you talk about, for example, planning. So you pointed out the strategies that have to do with zoning and land use, et cetera. So what would the Affordable Housing Committee say policy-wise about land use regulation and the impact and relationship to housing? And you could do that for transportation, you could even do that for recreation, you could do that for economic development. So how does the housing impinge, and what would the wording be for a policy to encourage affordable housing in relation to planning and zoning, transportation, blah, blah. And then you have that discussion about this policy statement, which then leads to actions.
And I would suggest that a great deal of what we might come up with a policy is in fact what's in this charge that we have been working on. The
And in the
language in
study,
there
the
is
study with your
right there.
strategies has quite a few.
strategies, I think, a strong point of that study. All right, this is a lot. We'll to be continued, I guess is what I have to say. I don't want to keep you here that much longer tonight, but can I move on to the rest of the agenda, and can we continue to foment this and I think everybody start thinking about the policy piece, because I think that's going to be a big discussion if we can even come up with an agreed-upon policy, which will be an interesting, but we might have, several parts to it, so that's your thinking time for now, between now and the next meeting. Is there an update from the Affordable Housing Trust Board, Katie, any little thing you'd like to share?
I mean, not much. We got a little update from HAC that they're trying to continue moving forward with 107 the best they can, although not having funding, so there's some stuff that they'll come back to us with on that. And then, obviously, the trust did vote to put a CPC application in because they're going to be handling those going forward. The CPC application was for either cash funds to be deposited into the trust and/or a bonding of some kind. And we wanted to sort of see CPC's reaction to the bonding request, because we think that there might be some disagreement about whether or not bonding is the right way to go. So we wanted to keep it open, to invite a conversation, to see how they might best proceed in funding the trust in the future. So it was a very broad request that could be and/or combination of, let's have a conversation about it.
Great.
But that's really,
Thank you.
Yep.
And Governor Prince Committee update, Fran?
Our meeting was very interesting conversation. George presented the affordable housing units that we currently have in Orleans. And so there's a lot of discussion about what's already here. And then he presented from the planning aspect, the different studies. He went through 7 different studies that the planning board has done over the years that impact how the village center plan is evolving. And we wanted to hear that because municipal uses for that Governor Prince site is part of what we're considering, obviously, as well as housing. And then following that, there wasn't, and you might be interested in listening to at least the latter part of that meeting, because what followed was a really interesting conversation about what I just brought up about policy. What kind of housing do we want? Do we want to have mixed income units and, or developments? Where should they be? That kind of conversation. So I think that conversation is ripe to have in a number of different venues.
What was the date of that meeting?
22nd of November. But the whole meeting was interesting. George's presentation of the 7 studies that the planning board has done over time in evolving the greater master plan for Orleans and the downtown in particular is really helpful.
Thank you.
Would that be helpful for this committee to, I don't know.
I don't know.
Parts of it, it's about to be, we're going to be rewriting it soon, but it's on the website, and there are parts of it, anything that's labeled with a P, that the planning board's responsible, might help inform your thinking on it.
So future agenda topics, I think we've just added policy and financing information would be one of them. I would think would be another topic. Do we have any other topics? Our next meeting is January 4th, which is right after the holiday. I assume that's going to be all right for everyone. But
I don't mean to say that it needs to be an immediate agenda item, but I would like to talk about expanding our inclusionary zoning to include developments that are smaller than 10, and how that might, whether it's a cash contribution or right now it's a 1 unit for every 10, but there's incentives. So I think we need to explore alternative options in funding the trust, and I think that that's one avenue we can pursue.
anything else?
At some point, I'd like to talk about friendly 40Bs, because if we're going to be above the 10%, is it possible to use a friendly 40B to help implement whatever policies we come up with?
Okay. Anyone else? All right. We have approval of the minutes from November 9th. I have a motion to approve.
So move. I just had one.
Do you have a correction?
one, I'm not sure it's a correction, maybe it was my printer. Under building the toolbox for community engagement, that Marcia reviewed the work she's completed, provide the town committee readily available flyers, key talking points, PowerPoint slides, and other There's the word ends.
Matters, maybe.
Other methods, other matters,
I don't know.
you know what I
Can't
mean?
even find it right now, sorry.
Here,
And other media, maybe?
I'm not sure.
Great minutes, I don't know.
You see where I
Yeah.
mean,
I'm
Nancy?
trying to find it here.
Where are you?
It's under building the
Bottom of the
toolbox for
first page.
community engagement.
I don't know why oh, it's over here, that's why it's not in that pile.
Okay. Good point.
In other media, I
What
guess.
should it be?
Other media?
I think it's
Do I call
media,
it- let's
probably
call
be
it
media. That's-
Another
that's
what?
One correction,
Media?
other media.
Media, okay.
Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay, then I approve, I make a motion, we approve
Have a second?
with that change.
Second? Rich?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain?
I'm going to abstain, I wasn't present for the meeting.
Okay. And we still have to approve September 21st. I think we have enough people to approve it this time, which are it was very good minutes. That was our joint meeting with the Affordable Housing Trust Board. May I have a motion to approve those minutes? Fran? Second? Any corrections or additions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain?
I abstained from that one because I wasn't there.
Okay. Excellent. And our next meeting is January 4th at 4:30 PM here. I really appreciate everybody being here in person. I think the way we run our meeting with discussions, I think it really helps to be in the same room. So if it's possible to continue that, as long as the world allows us to, I think it really helps to go through these discussions. All right, may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.